October 15, 2021 started like any other Friday for Amara Okonkwo. She finished work at 6 p.m., made a quick stop at the bustling Lekki market for groceries, and arrived home around 7:30. Her fiancé, David, was away on a business trip, not expected back until Sunday. It was the perfect opportunity for a quiet night in. Around 8 p.m., Amara sent a text to her best friend, Chidinma. She suggested a cozy evening with wine and some wedding planning. Chidinma's reply came quickly. She'd love to, but a family issue had come up, rain check for tomorrow. Love you sis, she wrote, adding a red heart emoji. Love you too. Tomorrow for sure, Amara replied, adding a pink heart of her own. These would be the last words Amara ever sent to the woman she considered her sister. Just under 2 hours later, at 9:47 p.m., the security cameras in Amara's apartment building captured a figure dressed in a delivery uniform entering through the service entrance. The person kept their head down, their face hidden by a cap and a face mask. They were carrying a large package. At 9:53 p.m., the cameras recorded the same figure arriving on Amara's floor. They knocked on her door. What happened in the moments that followed had to be pieced together later from forensic evidence. Amara, likely expecting a package she'd ordered, opened her door. The figure immediately forced their way inside. A violent struggle ensued. Neighbors would later tell police they heard raised voices, the distinct sound of glass shattering, and then, around 10:15 p.m., a noise that sounded like a scream being abruptly cut short. At 10:47 p.m., the figure in the delivery uniform was seen leaving the building, moving much more quickly now. The large package they had carried in was gone. A little over half an hour later, at 11:23 p.m., a building security guard on his nightly rounds noticed something alarming. Amara's front door was slightly ajar. He knocked, but there was no answer. Following protocol, he entered the apartment and discovered a scene of pure chaos. Furniture was overturned, vases were smashed to pieces, and in the bedroom, he found Amara Okonkwo. She had been stabbed 7 times. Detective Folake Adeyemi arrived at the crime scene at 1:30 in the morning on October 16th. What she saw immediately felt wrong. It was staged to look like a robbery, she explained later during the trial. But nothing significant was missing. Amara's laptop was there, her TV, her jewelry box. A few expensive pieces were taken, but others were just left behind. A real robber would have taken everything valuable. This was someone creating the appearance of a robbery. Even more telling, there were no signs of forced entry. This confirmed the horrifying truth. Amara had opened the door for her killer. The investigation began to move at a rapid pace. Amara's fiancé, David Okafor, had a rock-solid alibi. He was in Abuja, and dozens of witnesses could confirm his whereabouts. He was cleared almost immediately. The police focus then shifted to Amara's inner circle, her co-workers, her friends, and inevitably, her best friend, Chidinma. Initially, Chidinma's behavior seemed entirely appropriate for a grieving friend. When she was told of Amara's death at the police station, she broke down completely, requiring sedation. She helped detectives identify the few items that had been stolen. She was a pillar of support for Amara's parents at the hospital, comforting them as they faced the unimaginable task of identifying their daughter's body. To everyone, she appeared utterly devastated. But Detective Adeyemi noticed something that didn't sit right. When we asked about Amara's recent behavior, whether she'd seemed worried or mentioned any problems, Chidinma immediately brought up the bank fraud situation, the detective recalled. She mentioned it several times, actually. It was like she was trying to establish a narrative of Amara being targeted by criminals. It felt rehearsed. The breakthrough in the case came 3 days into the investigation. Detectives managed to get their hands on surveillance footage from an ATM near Surler, where several of the fraudulent withdrawals from Amara's account had taken place. The person using the card had tried to hide their face, but the camera captured one crucial detail: a distinctive scar on their left hand. Chidinma had an identical scar. It was the result of a childhood accident, something Amara used to lovingly joke about. "My clumsy sister," she would call Chidinma, always injuring herself. When the police confronted Chidinma with this damning evidence, she denied it was her hand in the footage. But a forensic analysis confirmed it. The truth was out. She had been systematically stealing from her best friend for months. With this new information, detectives dug deeper into Chidinma's life. They discovered her secret appointments with Dr. Aidwell. They found the digital trail of her surveillance, the emails she had accessed, the location tracking. And most importantly, they found her connection to Marcus Obi. Marcus was arrested on October 22nd. During his interrogation, he fiercely maintained his innocence at first. But when the detectives presented him with evidence that placed him in Lekki on the night of the murder, his own phone's GPS data and traffic camera footage, his story began to crumble. "She told me it was just a robbery," he told the detectives, his voice breaking with emotion. "She said Amara would be out, that we'd have the place to ourselves. But when we got there, she insisted on going in first. She said she'd check to make sure the coast was clear. I waited in the stairwell, just like she told me to. Then I heard ... sounds, struggling. But Chidinma had told me to wait, not to come until she called me." Marcus claimed that when Chidinma finally signaled for him to enter the apartment, Amara was already dying. "There was blood everywhere," he said, the horror still fresh in his voice. Chidinma was standing over her, holding a knife. She was calm. That was the scariest part. She was completely calm. "She told me to take some jewelry, to make it look like a robbery. I was so shocked. I just did what she said. Then we left." Marcus led the police to the very spot where he had thrown the murder weapon into a drainage canal in Mushin. Forensic tests confirmed it was the knife used to kill Amara. It bore her blood and, crucially, Chidinma's fingerprints. On October 25, 2021, Chidinma Nwosu was formally arrested and charged with the murder of her best friend, Amara Okonkwo. The picture of a perfect friendship was shattered, revealing a dark reality of jealousy, betrayal, and unimaginable violence. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into complex cases. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one. On a cool October night, just after 1:30 a.m., Detective Folake Adeyemi stepped into a crime scene that would unravel a story of deep betrayal. The apartment belonged to Amara Okonkwo, and at first glance, it looked like a robbery gone wrong. But something was off, a detail that nagged at Detective Adeyemi from the very beginning. It was staged, she later testified, staged to look like a robbery. But the valuable items, the ones a real thief would grab first, were still there. Amara's laptop, her TV, even some expensive jewelry was left behind in an open box. It was clear someone was trying to create an illusion, not commit a theft, the most telling clue. There was no forced entry. The door was unlocked. Amara had willingly let her killer inside. The investigation kicked into high gear. The first person of interest, a man named David Okafor, was quickly cleared. He was in Abuja at the time of the murder, with an alibi confirmed by dozens of witnesses. With him ruled out, the focus shifted to Amara's inner circle, her friends, her colleagues, and inevitably, her best friend, Chidinma Nwosu. When the police informed Chidinma of Amara's death, her reaction seemed textbook. She collapsed, overcome with grief, and needed to be sedated. She helped police identify the few items that were missing. She was a pillar of support for Amara's heartbroken parents at the hospital. On the surface, she was the picture of a devastated best friend. But Detective Adeyemi's instincts told her something wasn't right. When we asked her about Amara's recent life, if she had any enemies or worries, Chidinma immediately brought up a bank fraud issue Amara had been dealing with, the detective recalled. She mentioned it not just once, but several times. It felt like she was pushing a narrative, trying to point us in a specific direction. It felt rehearsed. The real breakthrough came 3 days later. Investigators pulled surveillance footage from an ATM near Surler, where several fraudulent withdrawals had been made from Amara's account. The person in the video tried to hide their face, but the camera caught a crucial detail: a distinctive scar on their left hand. A scar that was identical to one Chidinma had from a childhood accident. It was a scar Amara used to affectionately joke about, calling Chidinma her clumsy sister. When confronted with the photo of the hand, Chidinma denied it was hers. But forensics confirmed it. The truth started to surface. Chidinma had been stealing from her best friend for months. This discovery opened up a floodgate of new leads. Detectives dug deeper into Chidinma's life. They found records of appointments with a psychologist, Dr. Aidwell. They found evidence that Chidinma had been secretly monitoring Amara, accessing her private emails, tracking her movements. And then, they found the link to a man named Marcus Obi. Marcus was arrested on October 22nd. Initially, he insisted on his innocence. But when detectives laid out the evidence, GPS data and traffic camera footage placing him in Lekki, near Amara's apartment, on the night of the murder, his story crumbled. "She told me it was just a robbery," he confessed, his voice breaking. "She said Amara wouldn't be home, that the place would be empty. When we got there, she told me to wait in the stairwell while she went in first to make sure it was clear." He paused, reliving the horror. "Then I heard struggling, sounds of a fight. But she had told me to wait, not to come in until she called me." Marcus claimed that when Chidinma finally signaled for him to enter, the scene was catastrophic. Amara was on the floor, dying. "There was blood everywhere," he said, shaking. Chidinma was just standing over her, holding a knife. She was so calm. That was the scariest part. She was completely calm, according to Marcus. Chidinma then ordered him to take some jewelry to make it look like a robbery. He was in shock and simply followed her instructions before they fled the scene. Marcus's confession led the police to a drainage canal in Mushin, where he had thrown the knife. Forensic tests confirmed it was the murder weapon. It was covered in Amara's blood, and crucially, Chidinma's fingerprints. On October 25, 2021, the charade was over. Chidinma Nwosu was arrested and charged with the murder of Amara Okonkwo. The investigation revealed the full, chilling extent of her betrayal. The jealousy, the theft, the surveillance, it all culminated in a meticulously planned act of violence against the person who trusted her most in the world. The friend who had let her in the door, completely unaware that she was welcoming her own killer. This case serves as a dark reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come from those we hold closest. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing for more true crime investigations. Stay safe out there. The trial of Chidinma Nwosu was a spectacle that gripped the entire nation of Nigeria for months. It started in March 2022, and from the very first day, the courtroom was a scene of controlled chaos. Journalists, true crime fanatics, and everyday people, many of whom had once cherished the idea of lifelong friendships, all crammed into the public gallery, hungry for details. This wasn't just a murder case. It was a modern-day tragedy that touched on the rawest of human emotions, friendship turning to betrayal, the stark contrast between wealth and poverty, and the corrosive power of jealousy and obsession. Leading the charge for the prosecution was the formidable senior advocate Bola Johnson. He and his team built their case with a chilling, methodical precision. One by one, they laid out the pieces of a puzzle that painted Chidinma as a woman consumed by a deep-seated envy and resentment. The first bombshell was Chidinma's own journal. The entries, read aloud in the silent courtroom, were a window into a mind that had been festering with dark thoughts for years. A narrative of a woman who felt perpetually overshadowed by her best friend. Then came the expert testimony. Dr. Aidwell, a forensic psychologist, took the stand to detail Chidinma's deteriorating mental state, describing it not as a break from reality, but as a calculated descent into obsession. Financial records were produced, showing a pattern of theft stretching back months, with Chidinma systematically siphoning money from Amara. But perhaps the most visceral testimony came from Marcus Obi, the handyman. His voice shook as he described the scene he walked into, recounting the moment he saw Chidinma standing over Amara's body with a calm that was utterly terrifying. But even with all this, it was the cold, hard forensic evidence that sealed the prosecution's case. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife, was presented. On its handle, Chidinma's fingerprints were found pressed in a pattern consistent with the violent motion of stabbing. The security footage from the apartment building, initially grainy, was enhanced. The shadowy figure of the delivery person who had gained entry that night was revealed to have the same build, the same walk as Chidinma. The final, devastating blow was the DNA evidence. Clothes were discovered, hidden away in Chidinma's parents' house. They were the clothes she wore on the night of October 15th, and on them, forensics found traces of Amara's blood. It was an undeniable link, a silent testament to her presence at the scene, not as a witness, but as a participant. The defense, led by Mr. Chukwuma Okeke, fought back valiantly. They tried to spin a different narrative, one where Chidinma was not the villain, but another victim. Okeke argued that his client had been manipulated by Marcus Obi, the handyman. He claimed that Chidinma was present, yes, but that she never wielded the knife. He tried to dismiss her journal entries as nothing more than the dark fantasies of a woman in the throes of a severe depression, not a premeditated plan for murder. "My client loved Amara Okonkwo," Okeke declared, his voice echoing in the courtroom. Yes, she struggled with jealousy. Yes, she made poor decisions and took money that wasn't hers. But love and murder are not compatible. Chidinma Nwosu did not kill her best friend. She was there. She admits that now. But she was as much a victim of Marcus Obi's violence as Amara was. It was a compelling argument, one that played on the idea of a friendship gone wrong, but not murderously so. However, the prosecution demolished it with a series of simple, brutal questions. If Chidinma was a victim, Senior Advocate Johnson asked, why did she help stage the robbery afterward? Why did she dispose of evidence? Why did she lie to the police for weeks? And most importantly, why did she not call for help? Victims don't do those things. Murderers do. Each question landed like a hammer blow, dismantling the defense's narrative piece by piece. The emotional peak of the trial arrived when David Okafor, Amara's fiancé, took the stand. He was composed, but the grief was etched onto his face. He spoke about the woman he had planned to spend his life with, the future they had mapped out together, and the soul-crushing phone call that had shattered his world. His voice thick with emotion, he said, Amara loved Chidinma. She would have given her anything. All she had to do was ask. If Chidinma wanted money, Amara would have given it. If she wanted help, Amara would have provided it. She didn't have to do this. She chose to do this. Then the prosecutor asked David if he had anything he wanted to say to Chidinma. For the first time in the entire trial, David turned and looked directly at the woman who had once been his fiancé's best friend. In a low, steady voice that carried more weight than a shout, he said, I hope it was worth it. I hope whatever you thought you'd gain was worth my fiancé's life. At that moment, Chidinma, who had been a stoic, emotionless figure throughout the proceedings, finally broke. Her composure crumbled, and she began to sob, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. But she said nothing. The defense made a crucial decision. They would not put Chidinma on the stand. Legal analysts immediately flagged this as a huge risk, essentially an admission that her testimony could do more harm than good. How could she possibly explain away the journal, the surveillance, the theft? How could she account for her friend S' blood on her clothes and her own actions in the hours and days after the murder? Her silence spoke volumes. In his closing argument, Senior Advocate Johnson returned to the question that had hung over the entire case from the very beginning. Why? Why did Chidinma Nwosu kill Amara Okonkwo? He asked the jury. Because she wanted what Amara had, and she believed she deserved it more. Because she'd spent over a decade comparing her life to her friends and finding herself lacking. Because envy, when left to fester, can transform love into hate. because she thought she could take Amara's place, her apartment, her fiancé, her life. She thought she could wear Amara's wedding dress and no one would notice the difference. Johnson paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. Then, his voice rising with righteous anger, he continued, "But there is a difference. Amara Okonkwo was kind. She was generous. She was the kind of person who pulled her friend up rather than pushing her down. Chidinma Nwosu is the kind of person who stabs her best friend 7 times because she can't stand to see her happy. The court must recognize that difference and deliver justice accordingly." On September 14, 2022, after 4 long days of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom. The air was thick with anticipation. The 4-person stood and delivered the verdict, guilty of premeditated murder. A gasp went through the gallery. Justice Adebayo Williams, in his final judgment, sentenced Chidinma Nwosu to death by hanging. The story of a friendship that ended in the ultimate betrayal had finally reached its tragic conclusion. The conviction brought some measure of closure to Amara's family, but the pain remained raw. Outside the courthouse, Amara's mother, Mrs. Folashade Okonkwo, gave a statement that was broadcast across Nigeria. Her voice was steady, despite her tears. "I lost my daughter to someone I considered a second daughter," she said. "I welcomed Chidinma into our home. I paid her school fees. I took her on family holidays. I loved her. And she repaid that love by taking my child from me. I don't understand it. I will never understand it. But I pray that God grants her the peace she clearly never had. And I pray that Amara rests peacefully, knowing that justice was served." David Okafor, Amara's fiancé, left Nigeria shortly after the trial. He relocated to Canada, where he has family. He has never spoken publicly about Amara or the case beyond his trial testimony, but friends say he remains deeply affected by the trauma. Marcus Obi, the accomplice, pleaded guilty to armed robbery and accessory to murder in exchange for his testimony. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As of 2024, Chidinma remains on death row. Nigeria rarely carries out death sentences, but her multiple appeals have all been denied. She gave only one interview to a prison chaplain, and her words were chilling. She reportedly said, "I loved her. That's what makes it so hard to understand. I loved her, and I killed her, and I don't know how both those things can be true, but they are." Dr. Aidwill, the therapist who treated Chidinma, now lectures on what he calls fatal envy syndrome. He describes it as a psychological condition where obsessive comparison and resentment towards someone close can metastasize into violence. In a recent interview, he explained the tragic irony of the case. "Chidinma had everything she needed to build a good life," he said. "She was intelligent, hardworking, and had people who cared about her. But she couldn't see any of that because she was so focused on what Amara had. She thought killing Amara would solve her problems, but all it did was ensure she'd never have any of the things she thought she wanted. She destroyed Amara, and in doing so, she destroyed herself." The case has sparked widespread discussion across Africa about toxic friendships, mental health, and the dangerous side of social comparison in our age of social media. Amara's Instagram account, which Chidinma had obsessively monitored, has become a memorial page. It is now filled with thousands of comments from people who never knew her but were moved by her story. The apartment in Lekki where Amara died has been sold. The new owners renovated it completely, aware of its dark history but determined to fill it with new life and new memories. In a fitting legacy, Amara's family established a foundation in her name. It provides support for young women pursuing careers in marketing and communications, a tribute to a woman whose life was defined by generosity and whose death was caused by someone's inability to appreciate their own worth. This story is a haunting reminder that we can never fully know what darkness lurks in another person's heart, even someone we've known for years. It's a cautionary tale about the corrosive nature of envy and how the people closest to us can sometimes harbor the deepest resentments. Friends who knew both Amara and Chidinma struggle to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the woman who committed such a terrible act. I keep thinking about all the times we were together, said Blessing Adeyemi, a former classmate. All the laughs we shared, the secrets we told. And now I wonder, was Chidinma ever really there with us? Or was she always somewhere else in her mind, cataloging grievances, nursing resentments, planning? Perhaps the most disturbing part of this case is how long Chidinma maintained her facade. For over a decade, she played the role of the perfect best friend while secretly harboring feelings of intense hatred. She smiled in photos while her journal revealed murderous thoughts. She helped plan a wedding while plotting the bride's death. This raises uncomfortable questions. How well do we really know the people in our lives? What signs might we be missing? When does normal jealousy cross the line into something dangerous? Psychologists who have studied the case note that Chidinma did exhibit warning signs that, in retrospect, should have been concerning. There was the obsessive behavior, the increasing isolation, the passive-aggressive comments, the theft. But hindsight is always clearer than foresight. In the midst of living our lives, we often miss the pattern until it's too late. The case has also highlighted the critical need for conversations about mental health in African communities, where therapy is often stigmatized. Dr. Aidwell has been vocal about the fact that Chidinma stopped attending her therapy sessions, and no one in her life even knew she'd been going. If she'd continued treatment, if she'd been honest about the depth of her feelings, if she'd had a support system that understood mental health, maybe this tragedy could have been prevented, Dr. Aidwell said, but we'll never know. What we do know is that mental health support needs to be more accessible, more normalized, and more effective at identifying people at risk. For those who loved Amara, the pain continues. Her friends have had to grapple with a complicated grief mourning not just the loss of Amara, but the loss of their belief in Chidinma and the loss of shared memories now forever tainted. I look at old photos now, and I see something different, said their friend Ngozi. I see Amara smiling, genuinely happy, and I see Chidinma smiling too, but now I know it was a mask. I wonder how she did it. How do you smile for the camera while planning to kill the person next to you? How do you sleep at night? David, her fiancé, has been quoted as saying that the worst part isn't just losing Amara, but knowing that in her final moments, she was betrayed by someone she trusted completely. Amara opened the door because she thought she was safe, he said. She thought everyone loved her as much as she loved them. She died not understanding why this was happening. That's what I can't forgive. Not just that Chidinma killed her, but that she stole Amara's sense of safety, her trust in the world. She died confused and betrayed, and that knowledge haunts me. This case is a stark reminder that true crime isn't entertainment. It's a window into human darkness, a lesson on what we are all capable of when we let our worst impulses win. Behind every headline, every court case, there are real people whose lives have been irrevocably shattered. Amara Okonkwo should be alive today. She should have married David. She should have celebrated more birthdays and achieved her dreams. Her story, and the story of the friend who took it all away, serves as a tragic lesson from the darkness. Thank you for watching. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, please know that help is available and you are not alone. We'll leave some resources in the description below. Please take care of yourselves and each other.